Hello and welcome to the fourth in our series of Insider Talks. These are a series of insights into the different doctoral research centers around the world. We've already held three of them so far. We've had one at MIT Media Lab, one for ETH Zurich, and one for ICT Stuttgart. And the purpose of these is really to offer you a glimpse, a kind of fly-on-the-wall view of the kind of research that's going on in these prestigious doctoral research centers around the world. Before I say a few words by introduction, and before I pass on to Alberto, let me just say a few words about the things happening later on this week. Can we move on next? First of all, tomorrow we have a really remarkable session for the doctoral consortium that involves Patrick Schumacher, Daniel Bolajan, Wan Yu He, and Theodore Galanis, AI and the Future of the Offices, part of an ongoing series of doctoral research sessions that we're holding, hosted by FIU DDES. We also, for this week, have extended the deadline until tomorrow, till Monday, for the experimental 3D printing with custom materials. This is a Digital Futures Young call for students and emerging practitioners. Then this week we have a slightly special week in the sense that we're taking a Saturday off because of Acadia, but we do have a series of other sessions on. We have on the 28th, we have a talk in Spanish on emerging technologies in Latin America. We also have, next please. We also have a Portuguese session on digital urbanism on the 29th of October. But today's session, today's session we'll be looking at the Bartlett. Maybe I could just say just a few very brief words about the Bartlett before handing on to Alberto. The Bartlett is a school that's had a very long and distinguished history. It is the school where Rainer Banham, probably the greatest of all architectural historians, was based for some time. It's also the school out of which space syntax has emerged, and we'll hear more about that today. And in the past few years, it's a school that has been building up steadily in the area of computation. It's acquired a massive arsenal of robotic arms. It now has a center in East London, in the site of the Olympics, where they have a dedicated state-of-the-art facility where the interactive master's program is housed, and so on. But it's fair to say that the Bartlett really came of age as a design school when Peter Cook moved there. I think it was in 1990, and totally transformed the place. And it's now really known as one of the most progressive schools of architecture in the world. One of the interesting aspects of the Bartlett, and I speak as somebody who's teacher at the Architectural Association, is the rivalry between these two institutions, which are in fact very closely located to one another, only roughly about a mile away. In some senses, the rivalry between the AA and the Bartlett is similar to that between MIT and Harvard, which are also located very closely to each other, or indeed to Tsinghua University and Beijing University, Beida in Beijing. That's a literally approximate. And that history is not just simply a history that is in some ways that is about geographic proximity, but it's also about the intertwined histories of the two places. Peter Cook, after all, came to the Bartlett out of the AA, and there's been a number of faculty more recently who've moved across there. So it's very much a kind of a rivalrous situation. It's fair to say at the moment that I think the Bartlett is in the ascendancy. So today I'm really looking forward to seeing exactly what has been going on in the Bartlett, a very thriving and a dynamic institution in London. So I will be handing over to Alberto, who is not only part of our Digital Futures team, that's the Spanish-speaking language channel, but also is doing a PhD himself at the Bartlett. And I'll be joining you again for the questions afterwards. So welcome, Alberto.
Alberto, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you. I'm here. So, well, thank you for the introduction, Neil. Firstly, this is, I think, it's an honor for all of us to be here sharing what we are doing in our ongoing research. Yeah, based on the PhD that basically Bartlett is running there with more than 130 students till the moment. Yeah. This is the group of 6 that we are going to present today. Basically, we are starting with this idea. Okay, sorry. There. This is the Bartlett for if you don't know the Bartlett. We are based on Gordon Street 22 and central London, closer to Euston Road, and well, for sure the Bloomsbury campus, the UCL. And well, the Bartlett School of Architecture and Film PhD structure program is based on a kind of diverse approach. We are different branches that I want to highlight in few minutes. But firstly, this building has been our home literally for several years, and now the Bartlett School of Architecture, as Neil mentioned, is a world-class and driven research community. So in our case, we are on 5 branches. These branches are really interesting, starting from our architectural design, history, and theory. Also, well, this is the second campus that we have is here is an Olympic campus, so we are running more research there. In terms of multidisciplinary approach, basically, as I was mentioning, we are architectural design, also architectural history and theory, and urban studies, space syntax also, and digital theory. After the last, I think, 6-7 years, and recently professional practice. So here's what we want to do in general. So these are the programs. So today, what we have is let's say we have two PhDs from architectural design, 2 from the space competition with space syntax lab, and 2 from digital architecture and digital theory. And well, I want to say firstly, welcome to all of you guys. The first one is going to be Annarita. The second one with her research, trans-individual protocols, parasitic logics of participation. Then the second one will be Nikoletta Karastathi with sympathetic apoplexis. Then Farbod as Afshar, but with consumption of space by movement and land uses in the social media age. Then Chenyang with a comparative study of graph structures, transversality movement, and exhibition strategy in the museums during the COVID-19 crisis. Then Melih Kamaoglu with evolutionary understanding in digital architecture. And finally, who is speaking now? Cellular architecture from distributed high resolution space. So I'm going to leave my screen off now because I want to share. I want to leave Annarita with the first presentation. Welcome, Annarita. I'm going to introduce you a little bit. Annarita is Papeschi is a practicing architect, researcher, and educator with a laureate in architecture from Firenze, a mark in architecture and urbanism from Architectural Association. She currently teaches on architecture and urban design within the B.Pro Masters in Urban and Master in Engineering Architecture, and also in the Bartlett School of Architecture. She also is completing her PhD in architectural design at the Bartlett School, with a thesis that draws on Gilbert Simon's notion of transindividuality to explore the ecological foundations of post-digital participatory design. Welcome, Annarita. Please, yes, what we have is our 9 minutes, so the screen is yours.
Thank you, Alberto. I will try to do as fast as I can, but please, if I go too fast, just stop me.
Yes.
So let me just share my screen and there we go.
Yeah.
So the Trans-Individual Protocols project explored the ecological foundation of ideas of digital participation, aiming at offering a better understanding of the complex nature of collective feedback within the setting of geographical and spatial representation and analysis as the basis for co-creative practices. Drawing on Gilbert Simondon's notion of transindividuality as the essential, affectual, and ecological interpretation of the social model of becoming a collective, the project explored the idea of transindividual design protocols, constructing a series of design methods and engagement practices that attempt to address the endemic disconnection of agencies and technological infrastructures displayed by the current participatory practice. Indeed, the idea of the evolution of the collective subject as an ontogenetic and metastatic process of affective event, firstly proposed by Simondon in 1958, has been more recently endorsed within the neurosciences, which have demonstrated how emotional intelligence is essential to rational thinking and social behavior. And if we consider the theory of the Umwelt, for which a specific model of the world exists in correspondence with each given creature sensorium, then we must acknowledge how this idea not only extends to humans, but to all forms of intelligence, each one with his own affectual vision. Recent new materialist philosophy further expands this notion to include all living and non-living agencies, also supporting an idea of cognition as a hybrid process that extends beyond the boundaries of agential bodies to include sociocultural and technological constructs. As a resulting social and relational entanglement of matter, technologies, and the living species, this expanded notion of transindividual subjectivity constitutes the entry point for the reconceptualization of ideas of collective cognition that, expanded by the contemporary ubiquitous nature of technology, becomes transcalar and pervasive. Within this line of inquiry, the project formulates a design research practice that uses biometric sensitive, immersive data visualization and participatory practice to explore the aesthetical, technological, and cultural dimension of transindividuality as a generative model for collective authorship. So today I will outline two projects out of the general transindividual protocol projects. So the first one is Pervasive Eyes. I'm sorry, I'm having an issue with the visualization here. So Pervasive Eyes Asturias draws on ideas of cultural mapping through social media analysis to construct a VR installation in the form of a collective archive of photographic memories of Central Asturias in northern Spain. Drawing on previous work that used galvanic skin response, an indicator of the emotional status of participants, also used in lie detection for emotional mapping, and within the context of spatial collective knowledge construction, the project investigates ideas of performative feedback as a method for spatial information exchange, relying on connectivist ideas of learning as experience-based transformation for collective sense-making. Geographical social media analysis have proven the ability to gauge social interaction and behaviors at the territorial scale, offering rich representation of the correlations between places and their inhabitants. An initial search conducted on Flickr revealed an archive of about 260,000 posts geolocated in Central Asturias. With the aim of developing a tool better fitted for the purpose of mapping the distributed nature of the region's polycentric landscape, the project focused on the development of a generative logic able to archive the fluctuating preferences of an audience interacting with the visual database as the basis for an adaptive and additive approach to the visualization of the information. Drawing on previous projects that explored the development of Arduino programmed GSR devices, performative feedback is constructed within a VR environment through the live collection of GSR and motion tracking. Developed as a multiplayer experience, the VR environment is accessible by 2 participants at the time, equipped with GSR devices and VR controllers. The participants are able to interact with the virtual display of geolocated spheres in order to access the photographic and text-based archive, while the emotive response is tracked live with the collective incoming signals used to additively inform the generative organization of a 3-dimensional graph, mapping the history of the collective affective response to the experience. As new visitors enter the VR space, the proximity graph is used as a navigational system to identify the location of specific posts with high affective engagement, while the data resulting within the new interaction inform new cycles of adaptation. By exploring the emergence of the embodied conversational models through the interplay of human and synthetic agencies, the project broadens our understanding of mediated process of knowledge construction and reasoning within hybrid performative ecologies by introducing the idea of performative feedback. And in doing so, it also outlines the potential to engage wider audiences with larger sets of information, outlining new participatory opportunities in collaborative cognitive experiences. The Whispering Garden project expands the previous exploration to multi-agential collaboration beyond human-machine interaction, including biological agencies, and exploring purpose formation and decision-making for the generative design of novel biodigital assemblages of interspecies and multi-agential collaboration. For this purpose, the project draws on previously explored ideas of performative feedback, incorporating strategies of parallelism of processing and learning through principle of machine learning. Drawing on a series of studies that have measured extracellular recordings of action potential in a number of biological organisms as an indicator of neural activity, the project uses the engagement of live algae and fungi culture. A digital infrastructure for communication is developed in 4B visual language programming, where the signals of the algae and fungal colonies measured using a picologger were imported using the picologger REST API. In parallel, GSR signals from human participants are captured live with a Wi-Fi GSR sensing device. Initial studies investigated the formal interaction of algeroid and P-Schwarz three-dimensional scaffoldings driven by the live signal of the algal and the fungal colonies. Exploring the dynamics of negotiation of space and the transitional organization generated by proximity, speed, level of noise, and morphological integration. The study describes a metastatic and multilinear formal language as the domain of the aesthetic exploration of the project. Within the first prototype of the installation, the animated visualization of an artificial landscape is introduced with a sectional point of view as the terrain for the interaction of the two scaffoldings that, in a process of underground excavation, modify the existing solid appearance of the terrain, creating a cavernous system of voids. Within these settings, machine learning methods are used to interface the live electrical signals with the drivers of the live visualization. A regression model is set up in Wakinator using an automated approach to the training of the model, specific conditions of the live electrical signals are set to start the trigger of the training. The results outline an assemblage of machinic, biological, and human intelligence that, by defining nonlinear correspondences and parallelism of processing linked to the history of the interaction among the ecology of the participants, describe the potential for the emergence of indeterminacy as a model of automated and collective learning within spatialized systems, introducing new opportunities for the interpretation of ambiguous spatial information. And here I will conclude. Along these trajectories, the two projects just outlined, Pervasive Eyes Asturias and The Whispering Garden, offer a timely understanding of multi-agential affectual, spatial and geographical analysis, offering alternative strategies for the use of emotive sensitive and immersive visualization as tools for collaborative self-reflections and practices of collective accountability. And by offering actionable protocols of collaboration that investigate the intersection of experience-based information exchange and parallelism of processing, they introduce new opportunities for emergent decision-making in spatial organization. The resulting constructs display the ability to connect different intelligences and their narrative in collaborative cognitive infrastructures that describe an approach to multi-agential and automated collaboration with translocal and transcalar capacities. This is an ability that is further enhanced by the intersection of the diverse range of biological and synthetic resource thinking and their diverse capacity of interacting at different scales and in different conditions, in a process that describes compelling trajectories of further speculation with regard to the operability of such platforms and their potential to inform novel distributed and pervasive architectural and urban organization of meaning and matter. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Annarita, for your presentation. Really inspiring, I think, for our audience. So, well, the next one is Nikoletta Karastathi. Nikoletta is an architect, PhD candidate, and lecturer at the Bartlett School of Architecture. She has a diverse background, working in the industry as a practicing architect and in the academia as a design tutor at Bristol, Cardiff, Newcastle, and Edinburgh. Her work has been exhibited at the London Design Festival, Dutch Design Week, Lakeside Art Gallery, and the Baltic Center of Contemporary Arts. Her key interest lies in architecture, textiles, computation, and material programmability. So her research's name is Symbiotic Ecoplexes. The screen is all yours.
Fantastic. Thank you for the intro. I'll just share the screen 1 second. You can see?
Yes, yes.
It works? Perfect. So I'm Nikoletta. I am, just to set the scene, I'm on the beginning of the 3rd year of my part-time PhD, and today I will be sharing a bit of my methodology, the theoretical background of the work, and a bit of the design work. And I would like to start with the title of the PhD as it stands, which is Symbiotic Ecoplexes. Symbiotic for making with, eco stands for ecological, and plexis for fabricating with fibers, a post-digital approach towards ecologically crafted textile architecture, where computational tools are interwoven with socio-cultural and situated environments, pushing for new cultural and material forms. And within all these ecological plexes making with the fibers, my interest started off by looking at craft and the textile craft, and I was very much interested in the interconnectedness of the maker, the tools, the environment, and the material, and how all these relationships influence one another. And within these interactions that happen, there is a close relationship that becomes established between how do you find the problem and how do you solve the problem. And also something very important, and also how through all of that we start establishing the craftsman, the maker's ethical stand within the process of making. Following from that, in terms of trying to understand the dynamic systems, I started looking at symbiotic systems, symbiotic models that are based on co-production and making with, where key characteristics of those systems are the lack of self-defined boundaries, and key influences of the work is Donna Haraway, and also other key elements of symbiotic system is that they're complex, dynamic, situated, and historical. And Donna Haraway within her books explores and has examples of those systems. One of the key examples that actually does relate with the work is the example of the Navajo weaving and the churro ship. So in this specific instance, the weavers co-developed with that distinct specific ship. In the relationship, there is a specific relationship with the place and with the making, with the locality, situated knowledge, and also storytelling. And another aspect that is also quite interesting and important is the patterns through the textiles and the relationship they have with the mythology and with the storytelling. At which point I really got very interested into myths and storytelling, and due to also my some Greek background, I started looking at Greek mythology and the different significations that you can have through understanding different myths, how they relate to the place, the different ways weaving can be used either as a metaphor or as literally looking at the materiality of some cloths and the stories through the textiles. And the myth or the story, or part of one of the myths or the stories that I got very interested in, is actually the story of the peplos. So the peplos that you see at the corner is what was woven for goddess Athena every 4 years for a festival that was happening. It was called Pan-Athenian Festival. And the idea was that women around the city were coming together to collectively weave that fabric that would then be exhibited as part of the Pan-Athenian Festival. It would go around the city, and then in the end, they would hang it within Parthenon. And the very interesting thing about that is that there are two things about it. The patterns that were woven onto the textile were mythological patterns that initially were talking about the relationship of gods and titans, but also there were also embedded historical aspects of the city, important events that they were woven within that cloth. So it became, and then it is said that it was stayed in the Parthenon for the 4 years, and it was actually a textile storytelling medium within Parthenon, an important moment. And on top of that, another thing that I find quite fascinating is that there are another key aspect is that there are several studies that indicate a close relationship between weaving, rhythm, and fabrication. So the fact that the mechanics of the loom, but also that as they were weaving, they were rhythmically saying the poems or something in relationship to the pattern and the fabrication. So in terms of current research questions, as they stand at the moment, I'm interested to see how to use textiles as a theoretical metaphor and as a construction method, working with hybrid processes of craft and computation to establish new ecologically crafted architectural cultures. And also, how can the architect weaver recode dynamic design analogies by bringing together narratives from the storytelling and science through material programmability, computational tools, and fabrication methods. And also, how can the understanding of those symbiotic and dynamic systems inform processes towards a more dynamic, situated, and ecological design? In which case, we can start imagining that you have all these different strands of textiles being used as a medium of exploration, and then we have the storytelling strand, we have textiles as the fabrication, the method of construction as well. And with the use of, again, material science, computation, textiles, and architecture, the research examines how we can retranslate and construct parallels from craft processes and theories to cultivate methodologies and prototypes through the textiles. And talking about textiles, what is very fascinating and important for me is to understand textiles within different scales and the effect that has. So for instance, we start by understanding really the yarn, the properties of the yarn, the creation of the pattern, how the pattern can become two-dimensional or three-dimensional, and also the relationship that the final product has with the environment. How does it get activated? What is the effect it has? And going back to what we said before about using textiles as a construction method and as a theoretical metaphor, we can see how different parts of the, let's say, the storytelling or the mythology can feed into different aspects of either creating the materiality, creating the computational patterns or the patterns of the textiles, or having an influence on the fabrication methods. And now I'm going to very briefly go through some of the design parts of the work, but not all of them. So in the past, I started working with wool and cotton. However, I got very much interested into creating and making my own yarns. I'm not gonna let this actual play. So through really understanding how to make yarns, to develop different recipes, understand the properties, and then started working with these yarns to see how the programmability of these yarns can actually mean something. So in one side, we have yarns infused with algae. The idea was to see and test how that could be kind of a living textile that then, depending on the light condition and the nutrients, kind of starts to grow and respond to the environment. And the second one was looking at a garment that can indicate a high environment of antimicrobial resistance, and the yarns are infused with antimicrobial agents. And also it was the idea of how do we start reestablishing that relationship with the garments or with the environments that surround us as an environment and a notion of care. So these were initial examples from the material programmability part. In terms of computation, clearly there is a clear relationship between each knot within the textile and how that can be translated within a computational environment, and it can be simulated to see how the textile behaves, but also to imagine how to create new patterns or how you can start weaving in those reasons within a textile and how those patterns could then be fabricated. In terms of the fabrication method, so far I've used the hand knitting machine, looms, and hand knitting. Hopefully later on I can start scaling up and talking about future steps. Currently, the idea is to fine-tune some of the current yarn recipes and start working a bit more with the idea of how to bring in the storytelling within the patterns and within the fabrication format, and then see how that can start becoming a more of a large spatial textile. And I will leave you with a project, with a kind of a more artistic, let's say, project that combines two of the key elements that I'm interested in, combines the situated materiality and also kind of the storytelling of a textile. So this project took place in Athens about a year ago. It was during the time that there were Mediterranean fires across Mediterranean. And the background of the project is that I gathered ashes out of the barren forest. I made yarns, two different types of yarns, which then got converted within a textile, an ash textile. So we can see the programmability of the material in relationship to the site. Then the textile was returned back to the site and to the burnt forest to create kind of a scaffold for it to dry. And as you can see, kind of dries out and it creates that lace form, which the idea was that this lace then represents the memory of the burnt forest, of what happened at that sense. And also we could even imagine how that could be reused, or based on the properties of that, how that can also enable future growth depending on when it's placed. So that is me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikoletta, for your presentation. Okay, the next one is Farbod Afshar Papeschi. Yeah, I did well. Yeah, Farbod is an architect and urban designer as a researcher also. He received his Bachelor in Architecture from Shahadi University and his Master in Science in Urban Design from the University of Tehran. Now he is a PhD candidate in Architectural Space and Computation at the Bartlett School of Architecture, alias the Space Syntax Lab. He works on the relationship between space, movement, and function during the transition from the modern city to the contemporary city, to understand how people understand and inhabit space. Besides, Farbod is a senior teaching assistant in MR Part 2 program and a research assistant in the Space Syntax Lab at the Bartlett. Previously, he was a tutor and researcher at the University of Tehran and worked as an architect and an urban designer on several projects in Iran. His research is consumption of space by movement and land use in the social media age. Welcome, Farbod. The screen is all yours.
Thank you, Alberto. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. I am Farbod. I'm a PhD student at the Bartlett in the Space Syntax Lab. Today, I am presenting part of my PhD research under supervision of Sam Griffiths. The research is about the consumption of space in the social media age. Simply, it studies the impact of social media on space and its function. The story of space and its function has a long history, but I start from the late 19th century. In that time, Sullivan coined form follows function, and in the 20th century, modernist architects and urban planners like Le Corbusier built projects, published books, held conferences around the world based on this idea. But this idea really worked. As all of you know how the story followed, it didn't. On 15th of July 1972, the Port Ego project was demolished. This project was built based on this principle, but it didn't work for its users. And the demolition of this project caused a crisis for thinkers and designers. Under this condition, Bill Hillier established a space syntax theory at the Bartlett in the late 1970s. He wanted to address this crisis. He and his colleagues wanted to know how humans inhabit in space and what is the relationship between space and its function. They invented a method that changed a spatial system to a graph, and then they can apply analysis on that graph. This method is one of the first attempts that researchers use computational analysis to study built environments. Hillier and his colleagues use different measurements to predict the co-presence pattern of people in a spatial system based on the graph that they shaped. Then, in the next step, they compare the result of this analysis with the movement data that they collected from the street. The result was amazing. There is a meaningful correlation between the finding of these models and the movement pattern on the streets. So in the first step, Bill Hillier and his colleague claimed that space has a meaningful impact on the movement flow in cities. In the next step, in 1996, Bill Hillier published a paper called Cities as Movement Economies. In this paper, he said that space is the main generator of the movement in space, and it's a distributor of socioeconomic factors in the city. So simply what he and his colleagues said is space is the main source of social dynamism in any spatial system, or if we want to reflect what Sullivan said at the end of the 20th century, space syntax researchers say functions follow space. This idea was, and theory was invented before the rise of the social media platform. In the 21st century, the rise of the social media platform changed the game. These platforms created a new digital layer in cities, embedded new potentials in space that can attract or repel movement flows and activities in a space. So under this condition, social media put a lot of pressure on space, and many thinkers suggests that social media is the new generator of movement and a new distributor of socioeconomic factors in space. My research tried to test this new claim, and I conduct this research in the context of Oxford Street, a very well-known shopping street in the heart of London. This shopping street has been the topic of British media for many years, and they said that this famous shopping street has a great history, but it wouldn't have any future under the shadow of social media. The research consists of 4 steps to explore this idea on Oxford Street: land use analysis, space syntax analysis, socio-spatial analysis, and social media analysis. Today, I am presenting only space syntax analysis section. This analysis helped me to understand if Oxford Street has been impacted by any physical intervention in the contemporary time or not. And I studied this street in the context of London in 1970 and 2019. 1970 is the peak of the modern city, and it is before any emergence of digital technology in the context of the city. And 2019, it's the peak of the city in the contemporary time and before the heat of the pandemic. When the model of London in 1970 and 2019 created, I typologically compare them, and this the result is Oxford Street didn't have any change, but the structure of London has a considerable change. In the next step, the space syntax analysis was run on these 2 models for 1970 and 2019 for different radius of movement and for different syntactical parameters. The result of the analysis showed that Oxford Street co-presence pattern didn't change, and 1970 and 2019 are similar, but the co-presence pattern in London has been changed. So the result show that at least the street hasn't been impacted by any physical intervention in the structure of London. Then in the next step, I can study the impact of social media on the socio-economic factors of the street without any concern, because there is no noise in my data. And then I can understand what kind of activities have been impacted by social media and how can I judge social media? Is it a generator or something else? Thank you.
Thank you, Farbod, for your presentation. Now it's time for Chenyang Li. Chenyang Li, are you here? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Chenyang Li is a EPSRC fund doctoral student at the Space Syntax Lab at the UCL. His research interests are related to space-type structures of complex public buildings with a focus on museums and art galleries. He holds a BEng in urban planning for the Hunan University and a Master in Science in Space Syntax from the UCL. Before joining to the Bartlett, Chenyang was an architect at Hunan Architectural Design Institute. Also, he was a guest lecturer at Hunan University and Changshan University of Science and Technology for the Space Syntax workshops. His research is a comparative study of graph structures, transversality, movement, and exhibition strategy in museums during the COVID-19. Welcome to Digital Futures. The screen is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. I'm going to share the screen. can you see the screen for the?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, it's working.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Chenyang. I started my PhD last year at the Bartlett and funded by the EPSRC. I'd like to share my study about the graph structure of museums regarding their reactions to the reopening during COVID-19. So the outbreak of the pandemic has posed these huge challenges to museums around the world, in which they were kind of required by the local authorities and the governments to change their spatial design of the layout, as well as the exhibition arrangements in order to control the spread of disease. And we noticed that because there was no such general guidance regarding this situation, most of the museums at the time have to rely on the personal experience of their directors. And some museums even needed to postpone the reopening time as they had problems figuring out how to adjust the COVID control requirements. So that is the initial idea of this study, and to contribute to the evidence-based guidance in case there's another outbreak in the future. Of course, we hope it never happens. But in the UK, the government at the time required museums and galleries to use this one-way strategy for the disease control, which is one direction circulation routes inside the museum during the visiting in order to reduce the face-to-face contact. And here are some photos of the one-way strategy applied in the National Gallery, London. So the theoretical part of this study is mainly based on the space and text theory that my colleague Farbod has introduced in his presentation. So in general, the space and text theory is a way to think space as an individual variable that has a potential influence on people's movement behavior. So we have this analysis called the VGA. That is the visibility graph analysis based on the DeskMap software. It is a method to investigate the distribution of the visual properties in the spatial layout. So technically, it kind of subdivides, if you see the right figure, it subdivides the space into small pieces and then calculate the visual connection of these pieces. So we have the value of connectivity, which calculates the direct visual length of the given piece, if you can see in the left figure. And then there's integration value that calculates the visual depth of all to all. So we use the colors to represent the visual distribution. For instance, if it is the integration analysis, the area with warmer color like red means that it's more integrated in the layout. And we also have this topological way to represent the layout that we use the nodes, if you see it in the top right figure, to present the spatial, to present the convex spaces, and then the links between the nodes to present the spatial connections, such as the doorways. And based on that, there's kind of a classification of the spatial types of these nodes. So the A space is kind of a dead-end space. The B space is on its way to the dead-end space to connect it with A space. And C space is the cycle of spaces. It's within the cycle of spaces. And the D space, we often call it kind of an organizational space. It has at least one alternative cycle attached to it. And in 2019, that is 3 years ago, the founder and pioneer of the space and text theory, Professor Bill Hillier, introduced this idea of Hamiltonian cycles. That is roads within the layout that visit each node exactly once and then end up where it started. So it's actually quite interesting that Professor Hillier talked about this idea 6 months before the pandemic. And you can see that it's actually quite related to the one-way strategy that we applied in the museums after the outbreak. So by looking at the Hamiltonian cycle, we can then calculate this traversability of the graph layout. That is the number of nodes within the Hamiltonian cycle divided by the total number of nodes. So for instance, if you see the bottom right figure, it has the traversability of 1 because all the nodes are included in the Hamiltonian cycle, whereas the bottom left graph has 1 node that cannot be included in the cycle. So it has a traversability value of 7 divided by 8. And if we look at the museums in reality, the traversability of their actual layout will be one of the factors regarding their ability to adapt to the pandemic situation. So the part of this study asks these 2 questions. First is how the spatial changes of museums influence the spatial performance of its configuration. And reversely, to what extent does the initial layout of the museum has the resilience regarding the pandemic outbreak? And I will show one of the case studies in the National Gallery in London. We investigate the first reopening of a National Gallery in the summer 2020. You can see that the National Gallery managed to arrange these 3 one-way roads, one in its west wing, the sensory wing, and another 2 in the main building. And we can see that some doorways and exhibition rooms were closed in order to achieve this one-way system. But we have a question that, is this the best way of organizing space for the pandemic control in the National Gallery like this? And yeah, here are the changes of the spatial types, as I just mentioned, in the first reopening of the National Gallery's main building. Yeah, we can see a clear drop of the proportion of D space, that is the red node, and then a rise of C space in yellow. That is quite nature because it needs to achieve the one-way circulation system, and C space means the space within the cycle. But one interesting thing is that if you look at the A space that is in blue, the reopening of this National Gallery even increased the number of A spaces, which is a dead-end space, from 4 to 5 with an additional B space in green. So in other words, there might be a chance that it will increase the face-to-face contact as you need to take a reverse way back after visiting these A and B spaces. Yeah. And we also investigate the change of the visual integration. So the original layout of the National Gallery to the left sees this kind of a hierarchical distribution of the visual integration, and it has evenly distributed integration cores, the red areas throughout the layout, and then it gradually changed to the local areas. Whereas with the closure of the spatial connections, like after the reopening, you can see that this hierarchical system disappeared, that the visual integration now only concentrated in the middle axis after the first reopening. So the next step, the study then calculates this change of the so-called intelligibility of the layout. The intelligibility is the similarity between the visual integration and the connectivity via VGA analysis. So in general, if a layout has a high intelligibility, it means that people within the layout will have a better understanding of where they are in the whole configuration. And on the other hand, if you have a low intelligibility, that will lead to the problems in wayfinding. So we can see that the figure dropped from 70% to 50%, 56% after the first reopening, which means that the spatial layout become less intelligible, that visitors might be more confused in the National Gallery during the first reopening. So I would like to say that it's hard to say that whether the changes happen in the National Gallery for the reopening has whether a positive or even negative influence on the disease control, as there is no clear one-way circulation guidance, and the visitors are more likely to have problems in the wayfinding. And also in answering the second question, which is to what extent does the initial layout of the museums has the resilience regarding the pandemic outbreak. The study analyzed the 10 museum layouts, and just to see how the traversability is related to the spatial types. And here are the results. We can see that the similarity between the proportion of state space and the traversability is quite low, while the proportion of D space and the ratio between C and D spaces are highly related to the value of traversability. And we also look at the figure for the ratio between the number of spatial connections and the number of total spaces, which indicates that it is not related to the traversability as well. So you cannot just simply increase the amount of connections between spaces, such as having more doorways, that will not contribute to the traversability, so as to the pandemic resilience. We would like to say that it's more likely to increase this value, the traversability value, by reasonably arrange the D spaces within the layout, while considering the relationship with other type of spaces. But it should be noted that this conclusion might be limited because of the small amount of research subjects, and it's still an ongoing project. Okay, so yeah, here's kind of a overview of the changes in the spatial types of London museums. We have Tate Modern, Tate Britain, National Gallery, British Museum, and the Wallace Collection. And actually, there are only two museums, the Tate Modern, and the Wallace Collection, that have fulfilled the one-way strategy. That is no returns throughout the visiting. While the Tate Modern, if you see to the very left, changed all the spaces to state space. The Wallace Collection to the very right of the figure changed to B space, that is in green. So, which means that instead of one direction cycle, it has this kind of one direction path with defined entrance and exit at the both ends. And all the other museums, they kind of have in different extent that they influenced by other factors, such as intention of exhibition arrangement. So they only partly apply the one-way strategy that is required by the UK government. So I would like to say that it's crucial to have an idea of the relationship of the space with other social factors when thinking of the pandemic resilience in the public buildings. And yeah, I think that's all. Thank you for listening. We cannot publish the whole version of this study in this year's symposium. And yeah, you are more than welcome to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chenyang, for your presentation. Well, now it's time to Melih Kamaoglu. Melih is an architectural theorist and historian. He's a PhD candidate and senior postgraduate teaching assistant in the Architecture and Digital Theory program at the Bartlett. He received his bachelor in architecture in 2017 and a master in architecture in 2020 from Karastathi Technical University. He worked as a research assistant at Eskehir Technical University between 2019 and 2020, where he was a tutor of basic design, introduction on architectural design and architectural studio courses. His primary research interests includes architectural theory, history, computation, evolutionary theory, and philosophy of nature. So his research is evolutionary understanding in digital architecture. Welcome, Emily, and the screen is all yours.
Well, thank you, Alberto. I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Neil, and to everyone in this team who make this happen, this session inside the Bartlett. I am Melih Kamaoglu. I am PhD candidate in Architecture and Digital Theory program at Bartlett School of Architecture. My supervisors are Roberto Bottazzi and Claudia Pasquiero. The title of my research is Evolutionary Understanding in Digital Architecture. And in this presentation, I will briefly explain the theoretical and historical background of my research. Then I will summarize what I'm trying to achieve in my PhD thesis. So let's start with a little bit background. As you know, if we look at the history, we realize that humans always try to question the reality of nature to understand how it works, what is the meaning of it, and basically to perceive their place in the universe. And we consider nature as a source of intelligence, as an inspiration to solve our problems we encounter every day, and as a creativity, right, which have undeniable effects on what we design, how we design, and what we make, how we make. For this reason, there is a comprehensive interrelationship between the philosophy of nature and architectural design procedures. In other words, the way we perceive the reality of nature determines how we design the world. In this sense, the philosophy of nature is also related with how designer understands scientific theories or the natural phenomena around us. Because at the end of the day, what is important for us, how architectural designers are transferring information from scientific theories, from the philosophies of nature, and also from the nature itself, and how they are transferring this knowledge into architectural design context. And what we can say from the theories on the essence of the things in ancient Greek, the mechanical understanding of the universe in the Renaissance, and to evolution and quantum theory-based understanding of reality, philosophies of nature have played a vital role in shaping architectural design theories and methodologies. And in the history of philosophy, there are the arguments about the construction of the reality, construction and the structure of the nature have been represented by two main streams, the essentialism and the process philosophy. In essentialism, things operate depending on the capacities, tendencies, and the features of their basic components that are essentially constant and stable. On the contrary, in the process philosophy, it promotes the contingency, change, emergence, becoming as the main elements of the description of the nature or the description of the reality. And within this context, the introduction of evolution theory advocated and promoted the process-based understanding of the world, in which nature is understood as a changing, dynamic, responsive, and evolving reality. And as you know, the advancements in the computer science made possible to analyze and also represent computational equivalents of natural evolution. And behavioristic and functional approach of cybernetics allowed us to understand systems, whether it is living or non-living, regarding their capacity to evolve and interact with each other. And finally, after the 1990s, architects started to utilize evolutionary understanding in design theories and methodologies through computational procedures, basically to represent the complexity, the randomness, the variation, and nonlinearity of nature in architectural design. Well, my PhD research is historical and theoretical. The historical timeline starts with 1990s, and there are lots of architects, there are lots of digital architecture theories I'm looking at, and my aim is to foreground and critically evaluate these various applications of natural evolution in digital architecture since the 1990s by instrumentalizing the philosophy of computation as an interface, as a bridge between disciplines. So if you think about the 1990s, it started with John Fraser. Then if you look at the AA, there are morphogenetic design understandings. And towards today, there are natural computing procedures for architects they are using. There are various approaches. But what I'm interested in, how they are trying to use evolution in their design practice. So it is interdisciplinary research. I'm looking at the connection between evolution as it is in nature, evolution theories, philosophies, in biology, in philosophy, and computations, cybernetics, and digital architecture. So I'm trying to understand how this information transfer is happening and what are the implications of this for the digital architecture. And for example, if you look at the information transfer between evolution to evolution theory and philosophies, we need to understand if the architect is looking at neo-Darwinian understanding of evolution, or if he is looking at punctuated equilibrium in the symbiosis theory, morphogenesis, they all have various different implications for digital architecture and various capacities, potentials, but also limitations. And if you look at evolutionary philosophies, of course, the question of randomness and goal-oriented process in the nature is becoming critical, and architects have various perspectives also on that. And if you look at this, you will understand that the idea is developing an intellectual framework for these various utilizations of evolution in architectural design by focusing on their association of evolution in philosophy, in biology, in computation. And as I said before, the information transfer is very important. And the next step is understanding how natural evolution has been transferred from evolution theories and philosophies to computational models and also in cybernetics. And if you want to understand the arguments of digital architects, you need to understand what are the implications of using artificial intelligence, genetic algorithms, evolutionary computation, and the distinction between analog and digital computation, and recently natural computation. They all have different limitations and potentials. And of course, the last step is how it makes sense, all of this accumulation of knowledge in digital architecture, why architects are using. Of course, there are various approaches. There are lots of different arguments about this. They can use it for optimization. They can use it for variation, to just to create a variation. They can use it for aesthetic purposes. And some of them can use that as a kind of introduction of cognition in the natural world into design. So basically, in the end, what is important for my research is understanding first how architects are using evolution and what kind of computational tools they are using and what kind of arguments they are proposing. And basically, arguments are there are two types of arguments. The first group of architects understand biology, let's say nature, and computation as a different ontologies. And they say, okay, if we use computation, then the information transfer will be abstracted and simplified version of the evolution. It won't be same in the nature. So it is abstracted knowledge of evolution. But there are other groups of architects claiming that actually with the power of computation and the artificial intelligence, actually we can create some sort of united ontologies between nature and the digital. So this is the summary of my research. If you want to contact me, you can send me an email, and you can also contact me on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you.
Thank you, Melih, for your presentation. And now the last one is me, so I must continue. Yeah. So in my case, as I'm architect academic and researcher at the University of Chile, and also master from the University College of London, and RBA chartered member. My career has been developed between academia and professional practice, exploring the form design from the local perspective and as a contribution to the global issues, applying a generative design, digital fabrication, BIM, and different skills. Also, my work has been recognized in different international instances, including Holcim Awards, Sambrella, and the Venice Biennale. And also, since 2006, I'm a professor of architecture at the University of Chile in different programs, but mainly in the part 1 and part 2 RBA validated track. And also now my research has been funded by the Chilean government and also UCL. Currently, I'm a digital design and technology tutor at the Bartlett with different programs, including architectural design, performance interaction, and among others. I'm going to start with my presentation. Share screen. So let's start. Moving this now. So here we go. Oh, something weird happened. Yes, there. Play. Yeah, no. So cellular architecture from discrete to a high resolution space. This research is developed by with my question, what is cellular architecture in general terms? I want to start with in nature, we can find some examples related with the bottom-up design in contrast to the traditional top-down design approach. Yeah, creating shapes that are complex but efficient at the same time. And also examples of this design way of in nature are social insects like ants that are building integrated structures in the underground, and also they are transmitting knowledge throughout the whole structure as a collective memory. In this particular case, cellular architecture is as a theoretical design research explore the application of cellular automatas for new ways of developing architecture as a growing design process, in contrast to the top-down design methods that we are applying in our architectural field. So the main research frameworks deals with the transition between computational thinking to architectural design thinking, crossing different stages on the CA history from the mathematical field, automation, and finally architecture as a material manifestation of that theory. CA coding is used as an information translator from the real context, generating complex spatial solutions for architecture. So I'm always asking me about how can the relationship between computational knowledge and digital design develop a methodology that use CA to finding an answer to the skill discontinuity problem in the built environment. So also in that sense, what is a cellular architecture automata? CA as a cellular automata works as an enormous computing architecture that can scale to high resolution patterns based on finite state machines. Usually arranging a discrete network allocating interactions or local interactions with its neighborhoods. So basically it's creating local negotiations and evolving from zero states to a next step in a genetic process inside a discrete grid. So the framework now has been divided in two main areas, well, from discrete grid to a high resolution. And also these are sharing three different approaches: the historical one, the theoretical one, and the design one. In this presentation, I'm going to show you a few elements about these three approaches, including the content from maths, biology, machines, design, memory, intelligence, automata, theory, generativism, post-natural approach, and also resolution, detail, discrete space, aggregations, and bottom-up in general, as a big framework. So synthesizing this, research as CA is dealing also with genetic algorithms and how to translate this information also in machine learning and in the stage that I'm actually developing, crossing architectural design, and finally is finding a cellular architecture as a result between let's say results and rules, dealing with inputs and rules and inputs and results continuously. So what is a cellular automata is a physical simulation system which uses a cellular automaton, a single seed developed by mathematical computational models. Basically, it's dealing with this idea of transitioning between zeros to one from a basic form with a seed that produce different shapes or different approaches in terms of in 2D or 3D, solving problems from biology, physics, structures, and urban studies. So in this case, sorry. This is a CA, and I want to start with this elementary automata, which is the simplest one, in which I'm exemplifying how the system works, in which a cell is reading what is happening in the neighborhood, and then it's creating different answers according to the set of rules as a deterministic way of thinking. Yeah. So after several generations, basically what we can see is a pseudo-deterministic structure. And why I'm saying pseudo-deterministic? Because it's deterministic when it's working alone, but with a super interesting patterns according to the changes that we can now see on our screen. But also we can increase the resolution of these results just expanding the discrete environment in which CA evolves. So the second one is this one. So from here, we can understand that a complex system emerged after the negotiation of the seeds in this discrete environment in 1D, as these examples. And also, I want to highlight that CA needs four main principles. One is the neighborhood, also the discrete grid system, also as an abstraction machine, and also as a dynamic structure. Why these four? Because with these four, it's possible to understand a CA in a proper way. So, zero automata is an artificial intelligence. Well, according to few sources, well, is linked with artificial intelligence, in particular with the simulation origins of artificial life, working also with a self-organized artificial system, together with working with neural networks and genetic algorithms. Each of them are kind of different, but in the particular case of cellular automata, the structural analogy is coming from a large system developed with simple elements having only local interactions, like crystal growing elements from a saturated media. And from there emerged the kind of idea of collective intelligence after the process of negotiation. So, well, we have the 1D version, also the 2D from Boyd Newman and the 2D from Moore from the 60s, mainly, changing the rules according to the neighborhood in terms of how the seed is negotiating with the neighborhood and how the seed is recognizing the neighborhood. And also with these two main research areas, has been possible to develop all these catalogs that are coming from Wolfram and a new kind of science. So also, as you can see with more and with a more complex neighborhood, it's possible to understand that the shapes that are emerging are closer to nature if we are expanding the neighborhood recognition from the seed. So also we have two main classes that they are working with this idea of saturating media in class 1, with this idea of highways in class 2, which are basically building straight lines or straight structures. The class 3 is all about this idea of fractal logic of developing shapes, and the class 4 is working with the principles of all the previous ones in a combination of a 2D or 3-dimensional space. So in that sense, for instance, 5 is a nice example that was developed during the 70s, and with these two approaches in low res and high res, and also if we are accumulating these patterns from Conway in a 3D way, we can recognize this idea of classes working together simultaneously. So, for instance, these highways, and in a vertical sense, also this idea of the class 3 working with this fractal logic, and also some few areas with saturated floors, or also with the class 2 with this idea of vertical or diagonal structures. So, but in that sense, also we can find the Lantern ant, which is a synchronous CA versus the previous ones, which works in a kind of logic of agent in a discrete environment. So the seed is not disappearing, the seed is programming the environment till the next step. So in a loop, we can create, after several steps, this complex shape just based on a set of 1, 2, 3, 6 or 7 rules. And on 3D, we can explore also the construction of collective structures using the different generations that these seeds can basically create according to the interaction with a bitmap pattern. So with the bitmaps or as an environment, as a neighborhood, it's possible to basically break this this idea of deterministic approach, because with the change of the environment, CA is just trying to find a different solution step by step. So these are examples about this example, and also with this idea of how the seed can find solutions on the three-dimensional space. So in this way, from this animation, for sure, and also the set of rules that are acting on 3D, creating these patterns. In terms of architectural components, this is really interesting, because this is a possibility to understand architecture from components, and from there to classes, and finally to architecture. So why this process is really interesting? Because with this process, I'm linking the idea of universal constructor that was defined by Newman, and then later this concept has been used by John Fraser. And using that, now in terms of digital tools, this idea is crossing from programming, pure programming with coding, to rhinoceros as a shape translator, then be under the grasshopper, and also with pix-to-pix as a possibility of translate this into a machine learning approach. And then finally, the results are translated in with the beam output, or also with the VR and let's say formats. But okay, all this has been possible because in a way, when John and Julia Fraser were explaining this during the 90s, they were explaining that with CA, you can create, or you can solve different problems. Doesn't matter the scale, because we are working with an abstract machine that can be escalated in according to our necessities. So in that sense, I think with this I'm going to end. Architectural space can evolve from initial state as a living organism, reading, learning, and applying from its concepts, growing also from the new points as a self-replicant logic. And this example is the same set of rules, but evolving in a different way according to the input. So these are where the inputs, these three are pseudo-organic patterns coming in a grayscale. And also, well, what we have here is a different example in terms of high resolution, and how with a 2.5 CA based on, in this case, with Game of Life, it's possible to create high complex densities. And as a CS high resolution is a space of architecture, yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm working on that, because in a way, using a topological approach, as the container of pre-existing shapes, let's say this universal constructor, colors and textures, and are feasible to be adapted to a new set of possible evolutionary scenarios in terms of geometries. So in that sense, here you can see the one seed colonizing this space in a 2D approach. It looks like a game from the 80s, yeah, for sure. But finally, the results are more complex like this one. So basically, these seeds are threading the steps from the previous generations. And then I'm exploring this idea of how to create these integrated spaces based on 3D printing, also in terms of how the detail could be let's say the starting point for a more complex scenarios, as this example that was developed years ago. And also how, this idea of translation from the digital into physical using 3D printing in different scales, also understanding the high resolution as a possibility to explore microscopical universes that are created based on codes and 3D printing in a high res. Yeah. And finally, we can see this idea also of a high resolution approach being explored according to the principles of density in terms of the generated seeds, and how it's possible to translate these seeds is a question that I'm still exploring according to the same set of points, but with different approaches. But trying to escape a little bit of the language of this empty voxel. But well, also we can return to these to voxels as a geometric containers in a spatial and a structural continuity in different scales in a resolution that could be replaced with more information, creating new outputs and following the principles from the original voxels in a three-dimensional space. So what is the cellular architecture as design theory? That is the main question. I'm still looking for answers, but hopefully this was really interesting for all of you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Alberto. So we have some time for some questions now. I want to invite those who are watching the live stream on Bilibili YouTube to send them in. Thanks for those presentations. I was just reminded as you were presenting, a comment I made earlier on, is that I think London is so multicultural. There was not a single British person in that, which reminds me very much of what I was like when I used to teach at the AA. In 4 years of teaching there, I didn't have a single British student. And it's a bit like, I think, also Zaha's office. I mean, London is so multicultural these days. It's an incredibly rich space. I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask, maybe to the first two speakers and then to the second two speakers. Did I get this right? Anyway, the first one is to Annarita and to Nikoletta. The question really is I mean, your work is very complex, and you have all these interactions going on. In the case of Annarita's work, you get this kind of almost like mountainous landscape appearing as a kind of project. And in Nikoletta's work, it's kind of very much this kind of woven fabric thing. I guess the question was, in a way, they both of them come out of a certain, research study of let's say, of data, shall we say. Is the primary object of your research to generate something as an object that is a beautiful event, the kind of amalgamation of all that research, or is it a more kind of analytic approach to try and articulate the research findings? I mean, because I found them very exquisitely beautiful, but I couldn't really track the actual findings in all that because it became this, it was absorbed into some totality. I mean, in some ways, just a bit to say, it's in a way, it's a bit of the challenge that, for example, the Media Lab also has. Is it a kind of research establishment? Is it a scientific, technological research establishment, or is it producing beautiful things? I mean, it's a kind of a dilemma that you've got in terms of that.
I can start, not that I have an exact answer. I think it is very challenging. And I think initially when I started very much out of the making. Like I wanted really to make and construct, but through that process, then all the kind of theoretical part started. And I think for me currently is more about the framework and the storytelling of the framework. And I mean, clearly the output as well, but I'm much more interested on that process. And how that feeds into, and how maybe someone else can get the same process, or what I call currently the architect weaver, or how you can have multiple voices that then can input and produce something other than saying, okay, so the way I would potentially approach it is having and analyzing different artifacts or producing different artifacts that then would have either different stories or touch on the different parts of the prototype. So don't see us having one final thing that does everything. Maybe each part kind of tries to combine or weave together a few of those things. And then that becomes a catalog, a language that then could be further investigated, used, other than saying, I don't know, I try and put everything together, because I think it's very, very hard. Yeah.
I mean, it's a very good question. I think for me, it's very much about establishing, it's not like the thesis is actually called and moved in through the years that I work on it. And at the moment, which is its final title, I hope, it's protocols, trans-individual protocols. So it's very much about methodology, framework, establishing basically like an approach that has very solid, that needs to have very solid theoretical foundation, at least for me. And through that, I actually kind of designed this series of interventions that look specifically into the impact of technology on participation. Ultimately, I mean that's the core of the topic. So I would say that, and perhaps it's odd as and I'm not sure if it's a weak point as part of a PhD in architectural design, but I think that there is an aesthetic research, very strong, but it's all about the connection to the methods and the justification and the narrative of what actually that aesthetic production mean and its value ultimately, because that's exactly the point. But it's but the focus is actually on the framework and on the exchange of ultimately establishing these protocols of communications for me in my PhD. So ultimately I have 6 projects. I mean, I show 2 today, the last 2, which has evolved and they started with this idea of actually, there was already a second project, but with this idea of the GSR, the motive feedback, the affective connection to space, and how we could deconstruct it from this human idea of feedback into something that could be negotiated with other type of intelligences and resource thinking. And then they kind of little by little expand. But when somebody look at them, and I have these comments a few times, it's like they look very different one from the other, no? Because every time I've been looking at different, at evolving specific theoretical points that I was interested in. And so there is, like, for instance, we have seen Pervasive Eyes today, which is all about really this idea of performative feedback, which is actually, it's an idea of feedback that is not the cybernetic feedback, the traditional cybernetic feedback of trying to direct, like to have an intention and to direct like a machine to actually achieve an objective, a goal. But it's an idea of feedback that is based more on time and on accumulation and on transformation of matter and through time. So there are like every project is linked to like a specific theoretical point that actually constructs all this discourse. And so that's my, and in a way, I think that as I have a background, I mean, I have a mark from the EA, and I work in practice for 10 years before doing my PhD. So my background is very much that one of the classic digital designer, if it makes sense. So I come with all this knowledge about methods, tools, ideas, and obviously it's always like evolution in the way we approach them. But for me, this PhD was very much the occasion to reframe and rethink the way we use those tools.
Just to kind of pick up on that, I think, I mean, with my doctoral candidates, we have basically kind of 3 modalities. One is a kind of very much scientific method one, right? It's a kind of lab method. Then there's a more kind of cultural theory, kind of discursive discourse. And then there's finally the design component, which it seems to me your work is a kind of interweaving imbrication of all 3 of those approaches. But the challenge becomes when you face a certain a dominant kind of frame of evaluation. I mean, I'm always struggling with the scientific method, which is always imposed. Let's say the Acadia conference, and I refuse to do this. I mean, how would Deleuze ever get a paper accepted according to the scientific method? At the same time, it's one way of grading things, and I end up sort of having to accept the fact and get 1 out of 5 for the scientific method sort of side of things. I mean, it is quite challenging. How do you fit these different diverse models into a more kind of traditional framework that's looking for some kind of results, as it were, that are kind of can be measurable and a result of a process? I mean, I'm not criticizing you at all. I'm just saying that I think you're dealing with a very complex landscape of different research methodologies. Maybe I could just ask a question also. The guys from Space Syntax. What always strikes me about Bill Hillier is how much he has this kind of very strong idea, but it's been going on forever, as it were, you know. And I think it's a very powerful idea. I think it's problematic in ways because I think it's all very two-dimensional, right? I mean, it's all based on plans and it doesn't assume any three-dimensional logic of topography of the space and so on. But my question would be, is in the time since Bill Hillier started this work, I mean, we've had a number of really important developments that that have changed the way we navigate our cities. I mean, I think that in the Digital Cities volume I produced in 2009, I think Alan Shiradia then produced an article. He's no longer there, Space Syntax, but he wrote an article for that. We also had one from Ben Bratton, and I thought Ben Bratton's article was really smart. I mean, he was basically talking about how a simple device like, you know, the iPhone has completely changed the way in which we navigate our cities. And I'm also, because I work on AI myself, I'm kind of aware of the fact that there are all these new techniques and things that are coming in. And I'm just wondering, to what extent has that model that Bill Haley left along, does it need to be, you know, challenged or destabilized by taking on board these new kind of technological approaches that can in some ways test out in a way? You could do all sorts of things using those technologies that would take us to a different level. But it seems very much we're still, from the presentation we saw, we're still very much based in the kind of the standard, the classic, as it were, Bill Hillier approach. Is that fair? I mean, do you think that we could bring in AI more into this? And I mean, I guess it must be in space syntax, but I guess and also the cell phone, how tracking devices, and where you might, for example, be able to track the behavior of these people. I mean, there's a model you're supposing, but actually what is actually happening? Let me just simply throw that out at you guys.
I go first. It's a really good question. The point is that in the space syntax model, we usually have a parameter for weighting the model, and that weighting parameter can be whatever you collect from built environment. For example, in the company, because they have different version of the software, they use different parameter for weighting the model and enrich it and make it closer to the what's going on in the built environment. And it is, I can say it is an ongoing project, and it's open to anyone can contribute to it, because in the best condition, the result of the model can predict 70% of the movement, not all the movement. Now we have, for example, parallel to the street networks, we have an underground network, and it has an impact on the movement of people in the city. And for example, it is the topic of the PhD in our lab, or other people try to explore beyond the existing a parameter that we use to define the space. So I can say it's ongoing. It's not something that we stopped at the specific point, and the door is open for further collaboration, further exploration by other researchers, and also in other fields.
Yeah, thank you, Farbod. I think I would like to answer this question from like more architectural level. Yeah, because we are actually looking at like that's a very good point about how you use like phones nowadays, that it kind of influence your daily activities. Actually, like first thing I did in the morning is open my phone and check like Instagram kind of popular. So yeah, I actually have a colleague, Gustavo. He has this study about he got the pictures from Instagram, a lot of pictures from Instagram, and he points the position of the picture that is taken on actual site and point that out on the site, and then look at relationship with the actual spatial configuration, like the VGA thing. So we would say that it is actually a kind of interrelationship with the social media and the AI and like the actual physical space thing. So it's like whether you either have a chicken or egg first thing. So space kind of enhances activity, which then enhance you like to use that or post that in the social media, and which attracts more people to come here, take the picture. So that's kind of a relationship. And another thing is I previously read a paper about how you use the AI program in Louvre, Paris. I think that is conducted by a MIT team. So they use this AI sensor in the Louvre Museum, Louvre, and trying to find a way to find the contraction point, and then proposing that if there's a dynamic method to, to divert the flows in order to get a more evenly distributed moving flows among the museum in order to prevent such contractions. But I would like to say that that is still based on the spatial nature of the layout. So also interrelationship, like where you want to put these sensors and what kind of space you want to control or separate the flows. You can still find that based on the space syntax analysis. So space syntax is more like a tool to analyze the space as an individual thing, while you think about other factors together with it. Yeah. And also, personally, I am actually working on this coding program about my research. So the process is that I need to define the theoretical part about how the space has this influence on the resilience of the, the one-way system, and how it's related to the cultural things like the exhibitional arrangement. And after that, I could have this system. Maybe it's like a plug-in in like Beam or kind of thing. You can evaluate the properties of your layout, and you can foresee what kind of the outcome you will see in the future when there's another control based on the layout and the potential social arrangement based on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the kind of interesting questions now is how do you look at the physical world, then look at sort of, let's say, computational models. I'm very struck by the model in China of City Brain, whereby you can, with real-time feedback, you can have a digital twin that will be able to harness the power of AI to sort out the traffic problems in a city. I'm also thinking maybe about the experience of AR that's becoming increasingly important in the way we understand our cities. I was struck by Bernard Schumi, who was someone I kind of admire very much, and he had this notion of a kind of event spaces whereby Le Parc de la Villette would actually happen as an event space, and people would be there congregating and doing all these things, which never quite happened. But there was one moment when they had a Pokemon Go episode when all of a sudden it became the event space that he was always thinking about because of the use of AR. So I'm increasingly thinking about how we navigate the world, not based on this simple kind of Bill Hillier kind of visual approach, but actually through other devices and secondary methods and things. It's anyway, I think it's a fascinating topic. Can I just say to anyone who, if you want some questions, if anyone's got any questions on YouTube or Bilibili, please could you put them in the chat, and one of our team will pick up on those questions. Maybe I could just, I want to ask Alberto just a more general question, and that is to say, I think it was Nikoletta, I think is a part-time PhD student, and I think you have, is that right? And I think there is a number. I know Nicolo Casas was doing a part-time PhD at the Bartlett. I just wanted to ask, what is the mechanism? How does that differ from a full-time PhD, and how does it from a kind of, I mean, just in general terms, how much time do people spend at the Bartlett? Do they have sort of courses you have to attend and all those kind of questions? How does a part-time one differ from a full-time PhD research?
I can explain this because I'm a full-time PhD candidate, and Nikoletta is part-time. And basically, the main difference we have the maximum permission of being working 20 hours per week. That's the maximum permission. We can exceed that, which is a kind of FTE 0.5, something like that. So, but with that, how we are dealing with the school is something really interesting. Because for instance, in my case, I'm always trying to be engaged with the different programs or activities that are in a way contributing with my research. Yeah, because if are not related, for sure are going to be kind of a waste of energy for both sides. So that's why, for instance, I'm collaborating with different programs, but basically in areas that I can contribute according to the things I'm researching, because also as I have a UCL scholarship, so I need to be more engaged with other things. But I'm teaching coding a lot, for instance, in 2 or 3 programs at least, and also how to connect these outcomes into, or how to transform these outcomes into, firstly, kind of precise digital models, and then from there into the digital fabrication approach. So this is how is basically what I'm teaching, and how I'm dealing also with this idea of between full-time student, but also teaching part-time, which is kind of inverted, because that is the model, at least from my side. Maybe Nikoletta can explain the other side, the part-time student and almost full-time tutor.
Sorry.
No.
Yeah, sorry, I think my internet is slow. Yeah, I can. I think, I mean, in terms of the time frame, the full time is very like it is 3 to 4 years, and then your CRS, so part time is around 5 years. So you get 5 years instead of 3, and then you get your CRS. So I think the time is the difference, and also in terms of courses, there are specific online things that are running throughout the year. So even if you don't attend something the first year, then you make sure you kind of attend the second or the third, because you can also audit parts of other master courses, which is actually quite nice. So that means that as a part-time student, you might not have the time to do everything within a year, but within the spread of 5 years, it does become possible. You just need to be strategic at which parts you think that would be more beneficial. It is quite tricky sometimes to keep the balance, but equally personally, I find it refreshing that I go in and out from the PhD, that I spend some time out and then I go back into it, but equally take some time to get back into it. So I think, yeah, it can be quite challenging, but equally is rewarding at the same time. We'll see how it evolves.
No, it strikes me that you haven't got 2 jobs. You've got, well, it strikes me that everyone's got 1.5, right? You're either full-time PhD plus some teaching, or you're full-time working plus some PhD. It's kind of like it's a impossible situation. I know how challenging that can be. I've got one of my doctoral candidates is Philippe Morel, who's teaches at the Bartlett. It's not easy, but I guess, I mean, I think I was more kind of thinking about the kind of the culture of you know, because I assume there are some people with desks in the Bartlett who are there on a hot day-to-day basis, and when you get these individuals who like you, Nikoletta, who kind of come in, I mean, do you have a post? Do you kind of, how does it operate? How does the culture of the part-time PhD operate in terms of presence in the school and those kind of things?
I think that that's pretty personal. Depends how it. I don't think there is a specific designated model. To be honest, I would have liked to be a bit more involved in some of the, because it's when you see people that are full-time or are more time within the studio, you know, some of the communal activities, and you're like, oh, I wish I could do all of them, but then, you know, they organize workshops sometimes, and it just doesn't work out that you can participate. But I think within the range of years, equally you get, yeah, I don't know, there is no specific model. It's just trying to find the balance of how to work around. Yeah, I don't have a specific answer. What I try to do is to try and have set days, which I'm not very successful at the time, to say these days are only research and these days are only teaching, but then one starts bleeding into the other. Hopefully I'll get better in this.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to kind
Yes.
of add something to that, because we also have been like 2 years on online fully, so it was a little bit like of a challenge in that sense. I'm a part-time as well, and because I'm at the end, I've seen it kind of changing and moving in the last few years. But generally, yes, we have studios. They are dropping normally with people that work from there all the time. I mean, personally, I've been always teaching, and I have my practice, and I've been doing the PhD. And I always try. I find we have like events kind of every 1 or 2 weeks normally, where we can go and basically listen to each other presenting. So that's a kind of, and I think what we have seen today is like all this diversity, which I think is one of the points that I enjoy more in my whole like PhD experience at the Bartlett. This very different and very broad possibilities that you have, as if I might kind of put down a flag for the for coming over to the PhD there. It is central London, so it is always a challenge. There are very interesting people and students that happen to be there, and I mean, for me, it's been a fantastic experience, really.
Mm-hmm. Could I just follow up on that? So I gave a lecture at the Bartlett back in December with Alberto, and it was curious because I was actually in London. I'm from the UK, right? But I live in California. I was from London, and so I came to the Bartlett, and nobody was there, about 3 or 4, because it was an online lecture, you know, which was kind of interesting in its own way. To what extent does has any aspect of the doctoral program remained online, or does it mean primarily in person? I speak as someone who's got doctoral kind of literally all over the world, and my Tongji PhD program, it's completely online, and same with the FIU one, pretty much. Do components remain online now still?
I can start to answer the question. I believe that the experience of COVID added a new experience for communicating with our supervisors. So sometimes maybe it's not easy to meet at the school. We can schedule it different time, but the school ask us to meet usually at the building, not virtually. But I said that in some condition, maybe it's an emergency call, or you couldn't arrange the meeting, you can use the online as a solution, because in the past we didn't have this solution under difficult condition, but now we can use it as a new solution for communicating with supervisors, sharing stuff and the like.
Yeah, I just think that it's kind of one of the things that tomorrow we have a session, right, the doctoral consortium, which I think is really what makes that interesting is that in a way you can hook up with anyone around the world, literally. I mean, you have time zones to consider, of course, it's not that straightforward, but you can kind of bring together some of the greatest brains in the world to form this kind of global brain, which I think is astonishing. And I just wonder whether, you know, I think there is this kind of knee-jerk response, we've got to return to normal and things, but maybe the new normal is actually this. I mean, here we are communicating online, and I don't even know where you are, actually. I mean, it could be that some of you are not actually in London. And it seems like the possibilities of that. And I also think in terms of kind of studio reviews, you know, bringing in tutors from abroad, or indeed, you're saving environmentally, not paying for, no one's flying and whatever else. And I just wonder whether this is going to be increasingly the way in which we're going to operate, even though we even when COVID's over, and it's still not over, clearly, you know, we might actually find that this is the most convenient way in which to have this kind of gathering of minds.
Yes. May I comment something? Because according to what I'm actually facing in the school, a phenomenon which was really, really interesting, is that I'm teaching several classes face-to-face now with my students, but also we have this idea of hybrid way of teaching in which we're expanding the class to the guys that I can assist or attend. For instance, including the open classes that I'm actually running with in terms of digital modeling. And now I have 79 students, which is something that is not possible to, you know, do in a proper way in a traditional room. So I have a few on face-to-face and the others online, which is really interesting also. So we are expanding how to teach now. For instance, also now are coming the new ADT seminars, these new versions, which are shared between the digital theory PhDs and also masters, and are going to be hybrid, which is really interesting. Because this is the situation now. It's this idea of mixing the virtual and real simultaneously, which is super, I think, super interesting as an experience.
We have a question in the chat from Giovanna Piaca, who is one of the Spanish language team on Digital Futures, a colleague of yours, Alberto, and she's in Peru. And her question is, how do you think your research can scale to everyday life in the future? Do you see it applied in the near future, or do you have ideas of the next steps to follow with your different research? You can check it in the chat if you want to. How do you think your research can scale to everyday life in the future? Do you see it applied in the near future, or do you have ideas of the next steps to follow with your different research?
Who wants to take this question?
Well, yeah. But I think speaking of space syntax, I think the core idea of this theory is the evidence-based design. So it's more like you know, you have this theoretical idea and you develop that mostly from the practical works. We have this company named Space Center Limited, and Professor Kevan Karimi is actually using the actual project to think about, you know, the process within that, and then make it to the theoretical part, and then get back to the real practice. Yeah, so evidence-based design is mainly the idea of what we are doing, I think, in our laboratory.
So you see the distinction between theory and reality. As someone who worked on Baudrillard a bit, I'm not quite sure what I take my view on, what view I take on that. But anyway, let me just, there's a question in the chat that comes from Marcus Novak. We were talking actually in our chat about the Greek mafia, who are already all over the world. But Marcus is from Greece, and he's at UC Santa Barbara. His question is, I would ask the participants about the future of their efforts in 2050, 2060, 2070. What do you see coming? Tangibly, if possible, method, outcome, impact, consequence, object, building, city, globe.
Well, it's really a hard question, but I can start with. If I think within the context of my research, I was speculating about the relationship between nature on one side and the other side. There's an architecture and there's a computation, cybernetics in between. And in today's presentation, actually, we saw various perspectives on it from Nikoletta, from Annarita, really different. But I think in the future, this descriptive understanding of the nature will be gone. I think it's going to happen near future, because right now architects started to utilize life itself as a kind of natural computation in design practices. I think that is the way we are going. I don't know where we'll end up. Of course, it's really speculative, but I think just looking at nature and seeing the geometrical proportions, I think it's gone, and it is not very common within the architects, I can say. And what I see, the biodigital ontology, it will be maybe real in the near future, like in 50 years. But of course, we will see. Yeah.
Does anyone else want to respond?
I can answer this question from the perspective of a space syntax. We hope in 2050, 2060, there's a better understanding of the relationship between space and function. And when architects design a building, design for a specific land use, we less see the fail of this project. So in some way, we move towards a sustainable environment, sustainable construction, and we face less failure in social aspect of the architectural project, like modernism, even like a lot of projects that these days are more based on speculation and less based on the analytic and precise understanding of what's going on in the future. You can compare a lot of renders with the reality of architecture or urban projects. They are different worlds. I hope in 2015 and 2016, when we compare these two pictures, they are the same, or they are really close to each other.
Yeah. Nikoletta and Annarita.
I can add. I think in my case, in relationship to the textiles as well, because textiles in terms of the material science and the fabrication methods and all the potential that I think we would have to explore, it is a space that has a lot more to give within an architectural context. So clearly, currently, I'm working on the methodology, and some of the things are speculative of what it could be. But I can see how that within the next few years, in terms of how you program the fibers, how you can use different fibers in order to have different performances within a fabric envelope, or either structural or performative, and also how that can work in relationship to the community could really be something spatial and architectural moving forward.
So I think that I mean, I was just trying to think, but basically, like so in a way, it's obviously like predicting like what's happening in probably like 30 years. It's a tricky one. No, I mean, if you think about, like, I think I'm very familiar with the article you mentioned before, Neil. There's Ben Bratton, the iPhone city. No, I mean, where it's kind of predicting this idea of ubiquitous company, and we are still kind of in a way dealing with the consequence of that. And the iPhone, if you think about it, is 2007, right? So we are looking at what, like 15 years, and how much our life has changed, you know, with the impact of this very simple thing that we are all kind of attached to our hands, you know? And obviously this is a kind of entail new model of cities and so on. And then, you know, sometimes you have this sort of little changes that changes absolutely everything. Another thing, like the pandemic and what we were saying before, this new ways of communication. We learn actually something that we have been resistant to for many years. I mean, this possibility was there. I mean, to kind of have these opportunities to talk across translocalities, the transscalarities, and so on, and we never took it for. I remember, you know, this idea of of us working under a bubble of glass in the middle of the countryside when you know, the internet first came out, and we didn't take it. Actually, we still were congregating in cities and trying to kind of more and more dense. And you're thinking about, you know, the whole explosion of urbanism in China and so on, right? Like I'm talking like in the past 20 years. And what I'm thinking now is like that if I have to think about prediction, I am thinking, so what is actually the technology that is just there today, and it seems that it's kind of bringing the new, you know, what will be the new steps, and you know, it is obvious, it is there. I don't know if it will be as impactful as the iPhone. I mean, we can only see, but obviously all these kind of AI possibilities and the changes in mean and the changes in and the impact on the creative processes is also very, very real and very strong at this point in time. Really still kind of be what changes the next 15 or 20 years of our practice. I think so, and I mean, it's like, and that's why I'm actually kind of very interested in the communication protocols, in how can we think those communication protocols, and how as designers we can actually like make this communication protocol something that we own also politically and as a matter, and something that we can touch, think, and share. And I think that it in this kind of breaking this black box and bringing it to the masses through small steps, there is really like the potential for changing the way we think about these technologies and making them broader and more impactful and of significance for larger part of the society. That's my, and as a reflection to us as designers and people that think and about cities all the time and develop cities and ways of sharing spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to go back to that question about the real, which I've been suspicious of the term real ever since it was the way that Coca-Cola marketed itself as the real thing. And I think one could really be kind of skeptical. I think that the key question, though, in some ways, is how the hegemony of the physical, how the physical world is being kind of interrogated by these new processes. I think, and my point about why Bratton's article was so brilliant in that AD was everyone else was assuming it was all about the new language of architecture. What will architecture look like? And frankly, the city of the future. I always ask my students. I say, what is it going to look like? Something out of the Jetsons or something out of our existing domain, but just retrofitted with all these technologies. So that is the kind of the domain that we're going. And I guess one thing about Bratton I thought was very interesting is in that essay, he starts speculating about how the car can become the office and so on. And he wrote this a year before Uber became, on market, which meant the car actually became the source of employment in a very interesting way. And one of the comments I always make about, I tease Mario Carpo about, because I think he gets completely wrong. He's asking, what were the architecture of big data? And he's looking for some kind of style of architecture. But actually the world of AI and big data is not about physical form. It's about different processes of ways of processing information. So when you order an Uber taxi, it's not as though Uber taxis look different to ordinary taxis. They're simply the way that we process the information is fundamentally different. So I think we have to maybe kind of push beyond the world of the hegemony of the physical and style and so on, and look at these informational systems as the drivers of the cities of the future.
Yes, but we leave us the question open of, are we gonna kind of be passive actor in the game of the result in aesthetics, or are we going to find some, threads for, because ultimately aesthetics is our domain, no? I mean, as designers, we cannot just avoid it. That's what it is about. I mean, we are the experts of aesthetics. And I think that's really like what is, on one side, I feel this pool of exactly that type of investigation. On the other one, I'm actually left with this knowledge and this huge amount of research that was the first computational term, on form. I mean, we are talking about all of that sort of type of investigation that was about a kind of exploring a very specific formal language that was, the result of technological innovation. It's going to be a very interesting question for the future.
Yeah, maybe I could add something like something really with the idea of how to basically we are going to add intelligence to each operation in the architectural process. Now we are dealing with aesthetics, mainly with AI, trying to reinform the creative process at the very beginning. So with how to deal with sketches or things like that in a super powerful way, to be honest. But we need to recognize also that architecture is bigger than that. That is a starting point. So maybe the question is how, for instance, AI is going to be part of in each part of the full process, including the construction process, which is super relevant. And now we are just dealing with the beginning. We are trying to train the few elements, for instance, with robots that are recognizing what is happening on site, but in a quite primary way, but nothing more. And let's add a little bit more about how to operate our buildings in terms of automation also, yes, but just a little bit. So we have a huge field to explore, I think, for the next years or decades easily.
I would simply add to that tomorrow we have a session on the future of the architectural office, and I think so I've been using Midjourney a lot, and frankly, the term style does, for all the times I criticize people for using the term style, it's part of the way that the Midjourney operates and things. But what I find interesting about these diffusion platforms is, having been writing about AI for several years now, and architects don't pay attention unless they can see visual evidence. I mean, we are visual creatures, and all of a sudden people pay attention and say, goodness me, look at that, that's amazing. But what I would claim actually is that those, for all the kind of the popularity of these diffusion platforms right now, that actually there's something far more significant that is that has been developed right now. That is a set of AI software tools that are going to be on stream in about 3 years' time. And I think, because we're so kind of fixated on the visual. I mean, I think we are kind of creatures who kind of oculocentric, shall we say, privilege the visual the whole time as architects. So we can't see it, we don't pay attention to it. But I think that really what is going to be happening is in the future is things that are not about form but information. And the whole city of the future is going to be governed by informational processes. And unless also, I would say another thing that I think comes out from the work at the Bartlett, it's a shame that we didn't have anyone working today, but the world of interactivity, where the aesthetics of form, and how do you talk about that when the form itself is mutating and changing and adapting and so on. So I certainly think that that the world of the future is going to be certainly is going to be different. I think we need to have adaptive spaces, especially for those who are working at home because of COVID and other reasons of remote working and so on. And I suspect that's going to be the agenda, which is going to be difficult for architects to grasp because we need to see the thing, the visual thing, to have evidence of it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I could say something related with that, because this is part of the conversations that we are usually having in our group in the PhD. And maybe something related with how the programs and in the master's levels on the Bartlett are pushing the boundaries for the PhD, but not instantaneously. It's something that is happening, let's say, 5 or 6 or even 10 years after. Yeah. Just in case, for instance, the architecture digital theory branch in this whole umbrella, this PhD in architecture at the Bartlett, started 2015, if I remember well. Maybe yeah. And that started as an idea of expanding the PhD, this PhD area for the persons that are or were alumni from the BPro AD, R&UD. So after 5 years of this, after 5 years, the creation of these programs, the PhD just started, just with one student at that time. And then gradually we became a little bit more populated, but I insist, there is a delay or between what is happening on the master's levels versus what is happening later at the PhD level. In terms of, for instance, the performance and interaction, we create a master program level, I think 4 or 5 years ago only. So the guys that are recently graduated from there, they are now involved in the practice, in experimentation, other things. So if we want to then host them in the PhD, maybe it's going to be something that is going to happen maybe the next years, hopefully, or maybe with 5 or 4 years more, yeah, in the future. So it's something that is a process that is running gradually. Also, if we think about all the guys that we are involved in terms of digital at the school, we are not too many. we are 130, yes, definitely, or slightly more indeed now. But the guys that are involved in digital, we are not too many. So we are here, we are 6. Well, we can add maybe 6 more, 7 more, roughly 10. But yeah, maybe I'm wrong. But I just think that maybe I'm wrong. No. But because basically, most of the guys are more engaged with the traditional way of design or traditional way of approach of the historical of something. But in terms of what is happening now, is something that is in ongoing transformation. So we need to be patient a little bit, but soon the results are coming, I hope.
We should look to wrap up fairly soon. I just wanted to just ask any more questions on Bilibili or YouTube that can be forwarded to us. I just wanted to ask this general question now that we have you all here. What I found interesting, I mean, because you're all from all over the world. I know you're in the Bartlett, but you're from all over the world. I mean, what the question about what are you going to do with this research? I mean, to my mind, the first thing is actually this is to do the doctorate, do the PhD is increasingly it's become a job requirement, right? In the sense, in many countries you have to have a doctorate. But I mean, Australia, I think China, I think Serbia, and there are probably more and more countries. That was the last time I checked, where it's an official requirement before you can apply for a tenure track or a professorial appointment. And there's a de facto logic now. Certainly in the States, you don't really consider anyone unless they've got a doctorate. And so I wanted to know, just as kind of like feedback from you as you come from all over the world, from your experience. Has the doctorate become a kind of sine qua non, a kind of a prerequisite for getting an academic post in your countries?
I can start. if that's okay. Before coming to Bartlett, I completed my master's degree in Turkey, and I was research assistant in Turkey. In Turkey, if you are research assistant, it's a full-time job. And at the end of the PhD, with the research assistant job, you also need to do PhD. But at the end of the PhD, your job is not secure. So you will need to apply for the associate professor positions. So, but then I received the scholarship from the Ministry of Education in Turkey. And as part of this scholarship, after the PhD, your job is secure. So right now, I know where I'm going to turn back. So it is all planned, I would say. So for me, of course, the first reason was, I mean, yeah, securing your job, because I wanted to be in academia for years. And as you can see, I'm much more interested in philosophical, theoretical, and historical side of this story. And yeah, the first reason is securing the job, but also the research interest, of course, after seeing the digital theory program in Bartlett, and I already knew Mario Karpo and I knew his work. And I realized my work is very related, and I'm also dealing with history and theory, and I came here to have the PhD from Bartlett. Then probably I will be turning back. Yeah, for me, this was the reason.
Any other experiences about people who, well, from whose country PhDs are almost like a requirement to get a job? Is it?
Well, I can continue from Chile because we started with this idea of a scholarship from the Chilean government decades ago. And in terms of PhD, it became a requirement for the schools and universities according to the central level, let's say the government, if you want to get our own research funding. So you must increase the persons, the academics with a PhD degree, and with that you can ensure the incomes in terms of research for your institution. So yes, in a way it became mandatory, but in the case of architecture in particular, it's something like it's 50-50 maybe. Yeah, because in terms of architecture, we must be engaged also with the practice. So in terms of Chile, well, okay, what we have now is a combination between guys from the fully academic background, from theories, history, and also in terms of proper research. And then the other half are coming from the practice. So maybe now it's time. The challenge is about how to combine these two universes, because one side is trying to say we are the owners of our own truth, and the guys that are in the proper academia PhD side are saying no, we are the guys we are creating knowledge now. So it's something like this tension is kind of interesting, and in particular case, it's nice to be in the middle. Yes, as a practitioner, and also we are with this PhD ongoing.
I mean, I can add on this, although I am Greek, clearly. I am a fully UK educated, so I come from the whole part 1, part 2, part 3, and I have been practicing for 7-8 years before the PhD. So for me, the PhD was more of I really had that urge when I finished my master. I really want to expand more in some ideas, and that's how I came into it. And I always saw it, as Alberto said, there's something potentially in between, which clearly is something very difficult to do. And then I started enjoying really teaching in parallel. So I don't know exactly where I will end up. So yeah, that is how I got into it out of yeah.
Yeah, I just quickly say that my position is very similar to Nikoletta. I can't say how it is in Italy because I'm not going back. I never really checked. So my practice is here, and I did it mainly for interest and go involved more and more in teaching, and yeah, with a lot of pleasure in doing it. So probably that's for somebody else's question.
Okay, maybe I can just ask one more question. We should wrap things up. But one thing, as somebody who was teaching at the AA, it was kind of interesting that looking at the kind of the process. I mean, when once once the Bartlett became part of, once the Europe was opened up to the Bartlett and there was no overseas fees as such, everyone was on EU fees. What implications are there for, especially for continental European scholars? And because now I assume that the fee situation is going to switch back to the previous one, whereby, so what was happening before is that you'd get EU students at the Bartlett, and the AA would be full of people from South America, Australia, and God knows where else, because it was the same for them. Does that dynamic play out anymore? What's the impact of Brexit? Just I want to say, I did not vote for Brexit, partly because I wasn't here at the time, but I certainly don't approve of it. But what impact has Brexit had on the intake of EU students at the Bartlett?
I mean, I can say that I have one European student in the whole BPro UD this year. I think it's already good achievement, and none in the MEng. So I haven't seen many European students lately. I'm not sure what's the experience of my colleague here.
Yes, it's similar.
Similar.
Yes, on the FPI also I have few Europeans only. On AD, maybe one in the introductory workshops. Yes, yeah, and no one else. Yeah.
My experience in part 2 says that the number of the European students in part 2 program is more than other programs at the Bartlett. I don't know what's the reason behind that, but in comparison with other program, I have met more European students. But still the number is not high, but in comparison with other program, it's larger.
So you guys remind me of my family back in England, who all voted for Brexit. I can't believe it, but they voted for Brexit. In the sense that kind of like, they said, oh, after Brexit, well, don't worry, we'll still go to Europe. And I said, well, where are you now? You're in Europe, right? I mean, so technically British students are European students. So this explains to me why Brexit happened, because people in the UK did not perceive the UK as being part of Europe. That's my theory.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Well,
a great loss for everybody.
A huge loss. No, I think this is London, right? This is incredible. This is why we see this rich array of cultural mixes, and what makes London so special, as indeed other metropolitan centers like New York or LA or whatever. It's that rich mix, and without it, whatever. Anyway, never mind. So I just want to let's try and wrap this up. This has been a really fascinating session. We've really got a kind of fly on the wall insight into what's been going on the Bartlett, and really interesting to see the sort of work that's going on. I mean, the problem I think about the doctoral programs is much of it's very hermetic. You're also working in your small groups, and we often don't see this work sort of presented. So that's the idea behind this particular series. I just want to add that we're going to next month we have a session with Tongji University in Shanghai, where I've been teaching, Patrick Schumacher's been teaching, Philip Yuan and so on, which I think will be interesting as well, because a lot of the PhD candidates are also in teaching in places. And then in December, we're going to have one at FIU, which is a very unusual model, because almost everyone is teaching somewhere else and it's completely online. Looking beyond that, and we're also looking at other possibilities. I know certainly in the new year we'll be looking at RMIT and other schools with doctoral programs. But we were also, in terms of digital futures, we're also interested in expanding and looking at master's programs. I think that you can't assume that I mean schools like SIAC or IAC or there's some very interesting kind of progressive schools that don't have their own doctoral programs, but nonetheless have extremely strong master's programs. So that's something that we're going to be opening up to in the new year, which I think will be very useful to get a sense of not just the doctoral research, but also the master's research going on in these institutions. So let me simply kind of say, maybe we can put up online the link to the Digital Futures YouTube library and things, because I want to just mention the fact that all of these discussions are going to be are uploaded to our site as a repository for the future, and so for free, which is an important part of this. What we're trying to do as far as possible is also to share information, especially to parts of the world where they can't afford to come and study in places like the Bartlett. I'm thinking particularly, Farbod, of your country, of Iran, where we can make all this information available out there. So we have it on the Digital Futures. Maybe I just mentioned it. Just the Digital Futures. If you go on to Digital Futures World, you can get the YouTube account, and there are lots and lots of sessions that we've uploaded there as a real repository of knowledge that hopefully will be useful for everyone throughout the world. I just want to then to wrap up, to thank not only the team here, but the presenters here today, and thank you for the effort put into that. Here we have the thank you, Alberto. The Digital Futures tutorials and things, and there's a whole series of doctoral consortia which have been put up there, and there's one that's going to be tomorrow on AI in the future of the office. So they're all there. So please make use of these things. So I want to thank not only the presenters today. Really fascinating session. I mean, I've walked past the Bartlett. I used to teach at the AA and used to come in from King's Cross. I'd walk past it without knowing what's going on inside. At least now we have this kind of insider fly on the wall view of some of the research, which was completely fascinating. I also want to thank the Digital Futures team. A lot of work goes on in planning these things. You don't see, it's like an iceberg. You see a bit, but actually there's a far more beneath in terms of all the promotion and all the things. And it's all done by volunteers, which is, I think, a remarkable gesture in sharing our passion for architecture. So thank you to them as well. And just to say that we have tomorrow the doctoral consortium, and then we've got a call for young. We've got a number of different things. I don't know if Alberto, you can put those up there, or maybe not. But yeah, tomorrow is tomorrow is the AI and the Future of the Office. It's going to be Patrick Schumacher, Wan Yu-he, Daniel Bolajan, and Theodoros Galanos. It's really a dream team of the real experts in the world on AI, and plus Patrick showing how it's influencing the office. And then, do you have the next slide, Alberto? Yeah, just to say, it's also the Digital is Young extension, and you can do a screenshot for the forms. And then finally, at the weekend, we've got one in Spanish and I think one in Portuguese. And this is another part of what we're doing, is trying to open up into different sort of languages. And we have also, we're planning some Turkish ones and some Greek ones. So I think this community is expanding. So thank you so much today to all of you. And thank you also to the team, and see you all tomorrow for AI in the Future of the Office.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Care.